Sometimes the people who save your life are the ones who never say a word about it. The fluorescent lights above the pharmacy hummed softly, washing everything in pale white that made the world look colder than it really was. Elena Bennett stood behind Register 3 at Harbor Point Pharmacy in downtown Boston, scanning prescription bottles while the rain tapped against the front windows. It was almost 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, the kind of night when most people hurried home, pulling jackets tighter around themselves and trying to forget the long week behind them. The pharmacy smelled faintly of antiseptic, printer ink and coffee that had been sitting too long in the break room. Elena rubbed her tired eyes and glanced at the clock mounted above the consultation counter. 42 more minutes until closing. 42 more minutes before she could drive back to her apartment, lock the door, and pretend everything in her life was normal. A customer approached carrying a basket filled with cold medicine and vitamins. Elena offered a practiced smile and completed the transaction with the calm efficiency she had perfected over years of customer service. The woman left. Another customer arrived. Then another. The steady rhythm of work helped keep certain thoughts away. Unfortunately, thoughts had a way of returning when the world became quiet. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her pharmacy coat. She didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. Ryan Keller again. The call ended. A second later, another notification appeared, then another. Elena exhaled slowly and pushed the phone deeper into her pocket. 3 weeks ago, she had ended the relationship. 3 weeks ago, she had decided she was done apologizing for things she hadn't done, done explaining herself, done trying to convince someone that kindness wasn't weakness. Yet Ryan continued calling, texting, appearing unexpectedly, always promising he just wanted to talk, always insisting he deserved another chance. The automatic doors slid open, cold air drifted inside. Elena looked up automatically and froze for half a second. The man entering wasn't someone she recognized from the neighborhood. He moved with quiet confidence, dressed in a charcoal overcoat tailored perfectly over broad shoulders. Dark hair, clean-shaven, calm expression. Nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention. Yet people noticed him anyway. The woman browsing cough medicine glanced over. A teenager stocking shelves paused briefly. Even the pharmacist on duty seemed to straighten a little. The stranger walked toward the prescription counter carrying no umbrella despite the rain. Tiny droplets still clung to his coat. He stopped near Elena's register. Up close, he looked older than 30 but younger than 40. His expression remained unreadable. "Good evening," Elena said. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm picking up a prescription," he replied. His voice was low and controlled, not loud, not intimidating. Just precise. Elena asked for his name. "Sebastian Romano." She typed into the system. The prescription appeared immediately. Blood pressure medication, nothing unusual. While processing the order, she noticed him studying a display near the register, not staring, observing. The kind of attention that missed very little. Her sleeve shifted slightly as she reached for the prescription bag, barely enough to matter, but enough for a fading bruise near her wrist to become visible beneath the fluorescent lights. Elena pulled the sleeve down instinctively. Too late. Sebastian's eyes had already found it. There was no dramatic reaction, no sudden question, no uncomfortable sympathy. His gaze simply paused for 1 second longer than normal, then moved away. The silence felt strangely louder than concern would have. He accepted the prescription bag. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." He nodded once and turned toward the exit. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The doors opened. Rain swirled briefly through the entrance. Then he was gone. She told herself it didn't matter. Customers came and went every day. This one would be no different. Yet 20 minutes later, she caught herself glancing toward the parking lot outside. The black SUV remained parked across the street beneath a flickering lamp. Its headlights were off. The engine wasn't running, it simply sat there in the rain. At exactly 9:58 p.m., the pharmacy finally closed. Elena gathered her things and stepped outside. The storm had intensified. Water rushed along the curb in silver streams beneath the streetlights. She hurried toward her aging Honda Civic, parked near the rear section of the lot. Her phone buzzed again. Ryan. She declined the call. Seconds later, a text appeared. "We need to talk." Elena stared at the message before locking her phone. The rain soaked through her jacket almost immediately. Somewhere across the parking lot, another engine started. Headlights illuminated the wet pavement. She glanced up and briefly recognized the same black SUV pulling away from the curb. It disappeared into traffic without slowing. Elena watched it vanish between the glowing red taillights of evening commuters. Then she climbed into her car and drove home. unaware that less than an hour later, while she slept beneath the steady sound of rain against her apartment windows, Ryan Keller would disappear without leaving behind a single explanation. The next morning began with a knock that did not sound like a neighbor asking for sugar or a delivery driver dropping off a package. It was firm, measured, official. Elena Bennett opened her eyes to grey light filtering through the blinds and the distant sound of rainwater dripping from the fire escape outside her apartment window. For a few seconds she simply stared at the ceiling, trying to remember what day it was. Her stomach tightened immediately. She reached for her phone on the nightstand. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. No new messages from Ryan. That alone felt strange. Ryan always left messages. Always. Elena slipped out of bed and crossed the apartment. The hallway beyond the door looked distorted through the peephole. 2 figures stood outside, dark jackets, serious expressions. She opened the door carefully. "Mrs. Bennett?" the older man asked. Elena nodded. "Boston Police Department. We would like to ask you a few questions." The words instantly sent a chill through her chest. 20 minutes later, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee growing cold between her hands. The detectives were polite, professional, neither raised their voice, neither accused her of anything. Yet every question seemed heavier than the last. "When was the last time you spoke with Ryan Keller?" "Last night. In person?" "No," he called. "Did you answer?" "No." The younger detective exchanged a brief glance with his partner. Elena noticed it immediately. Her pulse quickened. Rain tapped softly against the window. Somewhere in the apartment building a dog barked. The ordinary sounds only made the conversation feel stranger. "Is Ryan missing?" she finally asked. Neither, the detective answered immediately. "We have reason to believe nobody has been able to reach him since last night," the older detective said carefully. "Friends, coworkers, family members." Elena blinked. Ryan missing? It sounded impossible. Ryan was the type of man who always wanted attention, always wanted people to know where he was. The idea of him disappearing without explanation felt completely unlike him. "Did something happen?" she asked. "That is what we are trying to determine." The detectives continued asking questions. Had Ryan ever mentioned travel plans? Did he have financial problems? Was he involved in anything unusual? Elena answered honestly. She did not know. By the time they left, the apartment felt colder than before. Silence settled over everything. She stood watching their vehicle pull away from the curb. The city beyond looked washed out beneath low clouds and wet streets. For the first time, genuine worry pushed aside her frustration toward Ryan. What if something had actually happened? What if she had ignored his final call? Unfortunately for Elena, someone else was asking similar questions at that exact moment. Less than 2 miles away, inside a private office overlooking Boston Harbor, Sebastian Romano stood beside a floor-to-ceiling window. A file rested open on his desk. Ryan Keller's name appeared near the top. Sebastian's expression revealed nothing as he listened to a report from one of his associates. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, he looked back toward the rain-covered harbor. His gaze remained fixed on the water for several silent seconds. Meanwhile, Elena tried to continue her day. By late afternoon, she arrived at Harbor Point Pharmacy exhausted despite barely doing anything. Every customer seemed louder than usual. Every ringing phone sounded sharper. Her co-workers noticed her distraction almost immediately. "Everything okay?" one of the pharmacists asked. Elena forced a smile. "Just tired." The lie came easily. Around 6 o'clock, the automatic doors opened and another rush of customers entered seeking cold medicine and prescription refills. Elena focused on scanning labels and processing insurance claims. Work usually helped clear her mind. Today it barely helped at all. Then she saw him. Sebastian Romano stepped through the entrance wearing a dark coat and carrying a folded umbrella. For a brief second, Elena wondered whether she was imagining it. The timing felt too strange, too coincidental. He approached the consultation counter with the same calm confidence she remembered from the previous night. Nothing about him appeared rushed. Nothing appeared nervous. Yet somehow the entire room seemed quieter when he entered. Elena looked away first. She told herself he was simply picking up another prescription. Nothing more, nothing less. But as she processed a transaction for another customer, she noticed something unsettling. Sebastian was not looking at the shelves. He was not checking his phone. He was watching her, not constantly, not obviously, just enough to make her wonder whether the coincidence of their second meeting was not a coincidence at all. And when his eyes briefly met hers across the pharmacy floor, Elena experienced the uncomfortable feeling that this man already knew something she did not. Some coincidences feel harmless until they happen twice. Elena spent the rest of her shift trying to convince herself that Sebastian Romano was simply another customer. Boston was a large city. People visited the same businesses all the time. There was nothing unusual about seeing him again. Yet the explanation felt weaker every time she looked up and found him standing in the consultation area, speaking quietly with the pharmacist while occasionally glancing toward the front registers. By closing time, the uneasy feeling had settled deep in her chest. The following afternoon brought no answers, only more questions. The detectives called again. Ryan was still missing, no activity on his bank accounts, no responses to messages, no sign that he had boarded a flight or checked into a hotel. Elena listened from the pharmacy break room while staring at the rain streaking down the window. The conversation ended with the same uncertainty that had haunted her since yesterday. After work, she drove across the city to attend a charity medical gala hosted by Harbor Health Foundation. It was not the kind of event she normally attended. Her pharmacy manager had received 2 tickets through a corporate sponsor and encouraged her to go. Elena almost declined. Then she remembered she had spent the last year saying no to nearly everything outside work. Maybe one evening surrounded by strangers would help clear her head. The ballroom occupied the top floor of a waterfront hotel overlooking Boston Harbor. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses moved between tables carrying glasses of sparkling water and wine. Elena immediately felt out of place. Her dark blue dress was simple compared to the designer gowns surrounding her. She stood near the back of the room, hoping to remain unnoticed while reading a display about community healthcare programs. The harbor beyond the massive windows shimmered beneath the city lights. For the first time all week, the view almost relaxed her. Almost. Bennett. The voice behind her was calm, familiar. Elena turned. Her pulse stumbled. Sebastian Romano stood a few feet away. He wore a black suit that fit perfectly without appearing flashy. Under the warm ballroom lighting, he looked different than he had inside the pharmacy. More polished, more powerful. Several people nearby nodded respectfully as they passed him. One older businessman even stopped to shake his hand. Elena suddenly understood that he was not simply another customer, not even close. "You seem surprised," Sebastian said. "A little. That is fair." His expression softened slightly. "I did not expect to see you here either." The answer sounded polite, but Elena was no longer certain she believed in coincidences. "Do you attend these events often?" she asked. "More often than I would like." A faint smile touched his face before disappearing. "The foundation supports several healthcare initiatives." Elena glanced toward a banner displaying the names of major donors. Romano Healthcare Investments. The name appeared near the very top. Suddenly several things made sense. The confidence, the attention people paid him, the expensive SUV. He was wealthy, very wealthy. Before she could respond, another guest approached Sebastian. Then another conversation seemed to form around him naturally. Yet somehow he remained focused on Elena even while speaking with others. The attention felt strangely unsettling. Unfortunately for Elena, she was not the only person watching. Less than a mile away, inside a dark sedan parked near the harbor, someone studied photographs displayed on a phone screen. One image showed Elena entering the hotel. Another showed her standing beside Sebastian Romano. The observer saved the photos before placing the phone face down on the seat. Back inside the ballroom, dinner concluded and guests moved toward the terrace overlooking the water. Elena stepped outside, hoping for fresh air. The harbor wind carried the scent of rain and salt water. Below, boats rocked gently against their docks. For several peaceful minutes she stood alone, watching reflections dance across the black water. Then footsteps approached behind her. Sebastian again. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. "The detectives contacted you today," Sebastian said quietly. Elena turned toward him so quickly she nearly dropped her glass. "How do you know that?" For the first time since meeting him, his expression became difficult to read. Not cold, not threatening, simply careful. "Boston is a small city in certain circles." Elena stared at him. "You knew Ryan?" A distant foghorn echoed across the harbor. Sebastian looked toward the water instead of answering immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. "Tell me something, Elena. Did Ryan ever tell you where he actually worked?" The question hung between them as the wind swept across the terrace, and for reasons she could not explain, Elena suddenly realized she had no idea what the real answer was. The question followed Elena home like a shadow. "Did Ryan ever tell you where he actually worked?" The words repeated in her mind throughout the drive back to her apartment. Rain blurred the city lights beyond her windshield, turning Boston into a watercolor of red brake lights and golden street lamps. By the time she parked outside her building, the uneasy feeling had grown impossible to ignore. The truth was embarrassingly simple. She did not know. For nearly 2 years, Ryan had spoken constantly about work without ever explaining what he actually did. Sales. The descriptions always sounded vague. At the time, she had accepted them because people trusted the people they loved. Now that trust felt like a crack spreading through old glass. The apartment greeted her with silence. No messages, no calls, no sudden appearance from Ryan demanding another conversation. For someone who had spent weeks refusing to leave her alone, his absence felt unnatural. Elena tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and stood motionless in the center of the living room. A strange realization settled over her. If Ryan truly was missing, investigators would eventually search every part of his life, including her. She glanced toward the small hallway closet where several boxes still contained belongings he had never collected after the breakup. The sight immediately tightened her chest. She should have thrown them away weeks ago. Instead, she had delayed, hoping to avoid another confrontation. Tonight, for the first time, curiosity outweighed discomfort. 20 minutes later, cardboard boxes covered her living room floor. Old jackets, receipts, sports magazines, chargers for electronics she no longer recognized. Most of it appeared completely ordinary. Elena almost gave up. Then she noticed something strange. One of the boxes felt heavier than it should have. She emptied it completely. Nothing unusual remained except a small black organizer tucked beneath the cardboard lining. Her pulse quickened. She opened it carefully. Inside sat a phone, not Ryan's regular phone, a second phone, smaller, older, powered off. Elena stared at it for several seconds. Ryan had never mentioned owning another device. The discovery felt surprisingly personal, as if she had stumbled across evidence of an entirely different version of the man she thought she knew. She pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The battery was dead. Unfortunately for Elena, someone else already knew the phone existed. Less than 3 miles away, a luxury sedan rolled through the rain-dark streets near the waterfront. A man sitting in the back seat glanced at a message appearing on his screen. One sentence: Elena Bennett is searching his apartment records. The message disappeared seconds later. No reply came. Back inside the apartment, Elena searched drawers until she found a compatible charging cable. The phone finally flickered to life nearly 30 minutes later. Her heart pounded louder with every passing second. The lock screen appeared. Password protected. Of course it was. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the glowing screen. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have respected the privacy of someone who was missing. But Ryan was no longer simply an ex-boyfriend. He was the center of a mystery that now included police detectives, unanswered questions, and a wealthy stranger who seemed to know more than he should. Elena entered Ryan's birthday. Incorrect. She tried another date. Incorrect again. Then she paused. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Ryan once joked that nobody could ever guess his favorite number because it was hidden in plain sight. Elena typed the sequence. The screen unlocked immediately. Her stomach dropped. The home screen looked almost empty. No personal photos, no social media applications, no music, no games, only a handful of encrypted messaging programs, and a contacts list filled with first names she did not recognize. She opened the message history. Most conversations appeared deleted. Yet one thread remained. The messages made almost no sense. Dates, shipment references, meeting times, warehouse locations, nothing illegal, nothing obvious. Yet everything felt wrong. Elena scrolled slowly, trying to understand what she was reading. Then one message caught her attention. Warehouse 17 confirmed. Delivery moved to Thursday. Her breath stopped. Warehouse 17. The phrase sounded familiar. She had heard it recently, very recently. Suddenly she remembered fragments of conversation drifting through the ballroom at the charity gala. A warehouse, a shipment, men speaking quietly near the terrace. Elena sat frozen beneath the dim lamp beside her couch. Coincidence no longer felt like a convincing explanation. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Rain tapped against the windows. The second phone rested in her trembling hands while dozens of unanswered questions crowded her thoughts. Then another notification appeared on the screen. A previously hidden conversation automatically refreshed. One new message arrived despite the phone being dormant for days. Elena stared at the words appearing beneath an unknown number. "We know he is gone." The message ended with a single sentence that made the room suddenly feel much colder. "Do not make the same mistake he did." The message remained on the screen long after Elena stopped breathing. Rain continued tapping against the apartment windows, but the sound seemed distant now, buried beneath the pounding of her own heartbeat. "We know he is gone. Do not make the same mistake he did." She read the words again, then again. Every instinct told her to turn the phone off immediately, to hand it over to the police and remove herself from whatever was happening. Instead, she opened the contact information attached to the message. There was no name, no location, no identifiable details. Whoever sent it had gone out of their way to remain invisible. Elena locked the phone and placed it carefully on the coffee table. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. Every creak from the hallway made her glance toward the door. Every passing car outside sounded suspicious. She slept very little that night. By morning, dark clouds still hung over Boston Harbor. The city looked washed in steel gray as she drove to work. Harbor Point Pharmacy felt unusually busy. Customers filled the aisles. Phones rang constantly. Prescription printers hummed without pause. Normally, the activity would have distracted her. Today, it only made concentration harder. Around noon, a delivery driver arrived with inventory shipments from several regional suppliers. Elena signed paperwork and helped organize medication deliveries in the stockroom behind the pharmacy. The room smelled faintly of cardboard, plastic wrapping, and disinfectant. As she checked inventory numbers, something unexpected caught her attention. One supplier name appeared repeatedly across multiple boxes: North Shore Medical Distribution. The name triggered an immediate memory. She had seen it before, not at work, somewhere else. Elena frowned and continued organizing shipments until the memory finally surfaced. Ryan's second phone. Several messages mentioned North Shore Medical Distribution. At the time, she had not recognized the significance. Now the connection felt impossible to ignore. She discreetly photographed several shipping labels with her personal phone. The action felt strangely wrong, yet she could not shake the feeling that the company mattered. By late afternoon, her curiosity outweighed her caution. During her break, she searched publicly available information online. The company appeared legitimate. Warehouses, transportation contracts, healthcare supply logistics, everything looked normal. Too normal. Elena kept reading. Then one detail stood out. One of the primary distribution facilities operated near the industrial district, south of the city. Warehouse 17, her stomach tightened instantly. The same warehouse number from the messages, the same warehouse number she had overheard during the charity gala. Coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to believe. Unfortunately for Elena, someone else was already aware. She had started asking questions. Across the city, inside an office overlooking the harbor, a report arrived on Sebastian Romano's desk. He read it silently. Elena Bennett searched North Shore Medical Distribution. The update contained nothing else. Sebastian stared at the line for several seconds before closing the file. His expression revealed little, but a faint tension settled across his jaw. Meanwhile, Elena spent the rest of the afternoon debating whether she should visit the industrial district herself. The idea sounded reckless, yet every official avenue seemed stalled. The police knew almost nothing. Ryan remained missing, and anonymous messages were appearing on secret phones hidden inside her apartment. After work, she drove south through unfamiliar neighborhoods where glass office towers slowly gave way to warehouses, shipping yards, and rows of chain-link fencing. The sky darkened early beneath heavy clouds. Industrial lights glowed orange against the gathering evening. Elena parked near a public access road overlooking several distribution buildings. Most appeared ordinary. Delivery trucks moved in and out. Employees entered security gates. Nothing suggested criminal activity. Nothing explained Ryan's disappearance. Then she noticed something unusual. A familiar company logo appeared on multiple trailers entering Warehouse 17. North Shore Medical Distribution. Elena reached for her phone and zoomed in with the camera. Several workers unloaded shipments while security personnel monitored vehicle access. Everything looked professional, organized, legitimate, yet a strange feeling settled over her. She remained parked for nearly 20 minutes watching vehicles come and go. Then headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A black SUV pulled slowly onto the shoulder behind her vehicle. Elena's pulse jumped immediately. The SUV stopped. For a moment, neither vehicle moved, soft droplets striking her windshield. Then the driver's door opened. Sebastian Romano stepped out. Elena stared in disbelief as he approached her car through the rain. Not hurried, not angry, calm, controlled. As though he had known exactly where she would be. He stopped beside her window. Elena lowered it slightly. Cool air rushed inside. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Sebastian glanced toward the warehouse in the distance. "You should not be here," he said quietly. Elena tightened her grip on the steering wheel. Then maybe you should explain why everyone keeps telling me the same thing without giving me any answers." Sebastian looked back toward the warehouse lights glowing through the rain. For the first time since meeting him, something resembling concern appeared in his eyes. "Because," he said carefully, "the moment you start asking the right questions, people start noticing you." Then his gaze shifted beyond her vehicle toward something farther down the road. The concern disappeared instantly, his expression hardened, and before Elena could ask what he had seen, Sebastian opened her passenger door and said 4 words that made her blood run cold. "You need to leave now." Elena did not move immediately. Rain drummed softly against the roof of her car while Sebastian stood beside the open passenger door, his attention fixed somewhere beyond the darkness of the industrial road. The orange glow from distant warehouse lights reflected across wet pavement, turning everything into blurred streaks of gold and gray. "What is happening?" she asked. Sebastian looked at her for a brief moment. "Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you away from here." His tone remained calm, but the urgency beneath it was impossible to miss. Elena followed his gaze through the windshield. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then a pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. Another vehicle emerged behind it, then another. None of them seemed to be approaching the warehouse. They were moving slowly toward the public overlook where she had parked. A cold sensation settled in her stomach. "Are they looking for me?" she asked quietly. Sebastian did not answer directly. "Drive back toward the city. Stay on main roads. Do not stop anywhere isolated tonight." Elena stared at him. "You keep warning me without explaining anything." The frustration she had been carrying for days finally surfaced. "Ryan disappears. The police ask questions. I find messages on a secret phone. Somehow you know where I am every time I learn something new." Moment neither spoke. Rain rolled down the side window between them. Beyond Sebastian's shoulder, the approaching headlights continued moving closer. Finally he sighed. Not with annoyance, with the weariness of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. "You are asking questions connected to people who do not like attention," he said. "That is all I can tell you right now. That is not enough, I know." The honesty caught her off guard. Sebastian glanced back toward the road. "Trust me on one thing. Ryan's disappearance is not the story you think it is." Before Elena could respond, another vehicle turned onto the access road. Its headlights swept briefly across both cars. Sebastian's expression hardened again. "Go." The single word left little room for argument. Reluctantly, Elena started the engine. She expected Sebastian to return to his own vehicle immediately. Instead, he stepped back and remained standing beside the road as she pulled away, watching the approaching traffic. In her rearview mirror, his dark silhouette remained motionless beneath the rain long after she merged onto the highway. The drive back to Boston felt longer than usual. Every pair of headlights made her glance at the mirrors. Every dark SUV raised her pulse. By the time she reached her apartment building, exhaustion pressed against her like a physical weight. Yet sleep remained impossible. The second phone sat on her kitchen table. The anonymous warning message still glowed on the screen. Elena made coffee despite the late hour and opened Ryan's banking records on her laptop. She had access because they once shared certain household expenses. Most transactions appeared ordinary. Rent, restaurants, gas stations, utility payments. Then she noticed a pattern. Several deposits appeared every month from companies she did not recognize. The amounts varied widely: $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, far more money than Ryan's supposed job should have provided. Elena opened a spreadsheet and began organizing the information. Hours passed. Midnight became 1 in the morning. 1 became 2. The city outside grew quiet. Streetlights cast pale rectangles across the apartment floor. Gradually, another pattern emerged. Many of the deposits connected back to businesses associated with pharmaceutical logistics, distribution firms, shipping companies, medical suppliers, the same world connected to Warehouse 17. The realization left her staring silently at the screen. She had spent nearly 2 years with Ryan, shared meals, holidays, conversations about the future, yet she suddenly realized she knew almost nothing about how he earned his money. Unfortunately for Elena, she was no longer the only person examining financial records. At that exact moment, inside a secure federal office several miles away, investigators reviewed many of the same transactions. Ryan Keller's name appeared repeatedly throughout a growing network of suspicious accounts. One investigator circled a warehouse address in red ink before placing the file into an expanding stack. Back inside her apartment, Elena leaned back in her chair and rubbed her tired eyes. The room felt silent enough to hear her own breathing. Then her phone vibrated, an unknown number. For several seconds she considered ignoring it. Finally she answered. "Hello?" Silence greeted her. Then a familiar voice spoke. "You should stop looking." Elena froze. The voice was distorted slightly by the connection, but she recognized it instantly. Her hand tightened around the phone. "Ryan?" Another pause followed, long enough to make her wonder if the call had disconnected. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded lower than she remembered, more nervous, more afraid. "If anyone asks, tell them you know nothing," the line crackled. Elena rose from her chair. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Ryan, what is going on?" But before she received an answer, another voice appeared faintly in the background, a man's voice, calm, unfamiliar. And the moment Elena heard it, she realized someone else was standing beside Ryan. The sound lasted less than a second, but it changed everything. Elena stood frozen beside her kitchen table, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned pale beneath the apartment light. Ryan was still on the line. She could hear his breathing. She could hear distant movement somewhere around him, and she could hear another man speaking quietly in the background, not threatening, not angry, calm, controlled, the kind of voice that somehow felt more unsettling because it never needed to rise. "Ryan," Elena said again, "tell me where you are." Silence followed. Then Ryan exhaled heavily. The words landed harder than she expected, not because they sounded cruel, because they sounded guilty. Elena walked toward the living room window. Rain continued falling outside, turning the city into a blur of reflections and distant headlights. "Out of what?" she asked. "Everyone keeps saying the same thing. Nobody explains anything." Another long pause, then Ryan laughed softly, not the confident laugh she remembered. Something more exhausted, more defeated. "You still think I disappeared because something happened to me?" Elena frowned. "Did it not?" No answer came immediately. Instead, she heard muffled conversations somewhere beyond the phone, papers moving. The sounds reminded her less of a kidnapping and more of an office. The realization made her pulse quicken. "Ryan," she pressed, "what is going on?" When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a strange mixture of regret and relief. "You need to stop looking for me. I am not looking for you, the police are." Another silence, then a sentence she never expected to hear. "Maybe they should have started sooner." Elena blinked. For several seconds she simply stared into the darkness outside her apartment window. The statement made no sense. "What does that mean?" she asked. Ryan did not answer directly. Instead he said something else, something even stranger. "Do you remember when I told you I worked in medical distribution?" Yes, that was not exactly true. Elena felt the room grow colder around her. The admission confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Ryan had been lying. For how long she still did not know. "Then tell me the truth," she said quietly. "For once." Another voice spoke faintly somewhere near him. Ryan lowered his own voice immediately afterward. "I cannot explain everything." "Why?" "Because I am not supposed to." Elena closed her eyes. Frustration surged through her chest. Every answer created 3 new questions. "Ryan," her voice hardened. "Did you send those messages? Did you send the warning?" "No." The response came instantly, without hesitation. For the first time during the call, she believed him completely. Ryan sounded genuinely surprised by the accusation. "Then who did?" "I do not know." Elena paced slowly across the apartment. The second phone still sat on the kitchen table beside her laptop. Bank records covered the screen. Warehouse addresses, deposits, company names, pieces of a puzzle she still could not fully see. Then Ryan said something that made her stop walking. "Whatever you found on that phone, it is bigger than me." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the city. Elena stared at the rain sliding down the glass, bigger than him. The words echoed through her thoughts. "What does Warehouse 17 have to do with any of this?" she asked suddenly. The reaction on the other end of the line was immediate. Silence. Not confusion, recognition. Elena's heart accelerated. She had guessed correctly. "Ryan." Finally he spoke. Very softly. "You need to forget that address." "Why?" "Because once you understand what moves through that place, you stop being a bystander." Elena felt her stomach tighten. For several another realization surfaced. One that had been growing quietly in the back of her mind for days. "Sebastian Romano knows about this, does he not?" The line went completely silent. No denial. Surprise, nothing. Elena's pulse hammered in her ears. "Ryan." The silence continued. Unfortunately for her, silence was sometimes the clearest answer of all. At that exact moment, nearly 4 miles away, Sebastian Romano stood alone inside his harbor office, staring at the city skyline beyond the glass. His phone rested on the desk beside him. A message had just arrived. Elena spoke with Ryan. Sebastian read the update once, then again. His expression remained unreadable. Outside, waves rolled against the harbor wall beneath the storm-dark sky. Back inside the apartment, Elena waited for Ryan to speak again. Instead, the line suddenly crackled. Static filled the connection. Then Ryan's voice returned one final time. "If Romano tells you to walk away, you should listen to him." Elena's breath caught. Why? The answer came immediately. Not from Ryan, from the same calm, unfamiliar man she had heard earlier in the background. "Because he is one of the few people trying to keep you alive." The call ended before she could say another word. Elena stood motionless in the center of her apartment long after the call ended. The silence that followed felt heavier than any answer she had received so far. Rain continued sliding down the windows in silver lines while the city beyond faded into darkness. One sentence refused to leave her mind. "Because he is one of the few people trying to keep you alive." The stranger had spoken with complete certainty, not speculation, not opinion, certainty, yet that only made everything more confusing. If Sebastian was protecting her, why was he hiding so much? And if Ryan was truly in danger, why had he sounded less like a victim and more like someone trying to avoid responsibility? The following morning arrived beneath clear skies for the first time in days. Sunlight reflected from glass towers across downtown Boston, giving the city an almost deceptive sense of normalcy. Elena barely noticed. She spent most of the morning reviewing every document she had collected. Bank records, shipping information, screenshots from Ryan's second phone. The deeper she looked, the less sympathy she felt. Several transactions connected Ryan directly to payments that had no obvious explanation. Consulting fees, logistics bonuses, distribution incentives. The description sounded legitimate until she compared dates. Patterns emerged quickly. Large deposits often appeared immediately after shipments moved through specific warehouses, especially Warehouse 17. Around noon, an unexpected call arrived from one of the detectives assigned to Ryan's case. Detective Harris requested a meeting. Elena agreed. An hour later, she sat inside a quiet interview room at a downtown precinct. Sunlight filtered through narrow blinds, casting long shadows across the table. Detective Harris entered carrying a folder thicker than before. He looked tired. "We have made progress," he said carefully. Elena straightened immediately. "Did you find Ryan?" The detective paused. "We know where he is." Relief surged through her chest before she could stop it. Then she noticed the expression on his face. It was not the expression of someone delivering good news. "Is he okay?" she asked. Harris folded his hands. "Ryan Keller is cooperating with federal investigators." Elena stared at him. The words barely registered at first. "What? He is alive?" The detective's voice remained measured. "And he has been alive this entire time." For several seconds the room seemed completely silent. Elena remembered sleepless nights, police visits, anonymous threats, endless worry, all while Ryan had been alive. "Then why was he listed as missing?" she asked. Harris exhaled slowly. "Because several agencies were attempting to locate him before he voluntarily came forward." The answer created even more questions. Locate him for what? The detective studied her carefully. Then he opened the folder. Several photographs rested inside: warehouses, delivery trucks, shipping manifests, business records. None of it looked dramatic, yet something about the collection felt serious. "We believe Ryan was involved in a pharmaceutical distribution network under federal investigation." Elena felt her stomach drop. The room suddenly seemed smaller. Involved how? That is still being determined. Harris closed the folder. "But we can confirm one thing. Ryan was not targeted because he was innocent." The statement landed harder than she expected. Not because she wanted to defend Ryan, because she realized she no longer recognized the man she had dated. The relationship she remembered suddenly felt built on missing pieces, missing years, missing truths. After the meeting ended, Elena stepped outside into bright afternoon sunlight. The city moved around her as though nothing had changed. Cars flowed through intersections. Office workers crossed busy sidewalks. Street musicians played near the harbor. Yet everything felt different now. Ryan had not vanished because someone had harmed him. Ryan had vanished because he was running from consequences. Unfortunately for Elena, the revelations were only beginning. Less than an hour later, another development shook the investigation. Federal agents executed search warrants connected to several pharmaceutical distribution facilities across Massachusetts. News alerts appeared online almost immediately. Reporters gathered outside warehouses. Helicopters circled overhead. One address appeared repeatedly across multiple broadcasts: Warehouse 17. Elena watched the coverage from a waterfront cafe. Her coffee sat untouched. The images unfolding on screen connected directly to the documents she had discovered, directly to Ryan, directly to the secret phone, and somehow directly to Sebastian Romano. As if summoned by the thought, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Now you understand why I wanted you away from that place." Elena turned. Sebastian stood near the entrance wearing a dark overcoat despite the sunshine outside. For the first time since meeting him, she did not feel fear, only exhaustion. "Ryan was never the victim," she said quietly. Sebastian held her gaze. "No," he replied, "he was not." Elena looked back toward the television where reporters continued discussing investigations, supply chains, and pharmaceutical fraud. Then she asked the question she had been avoiding for days. "How long have you known?" Sebastian's expression remained calm, but his silence lasted just long enough to make Elena realize she might not like the answer. The question lingered between them while the television continued flashing images of federal agents, warehouse entrances, and reporters speaking into microphones. Sebastian did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the harbor beyond the cafe windows, where afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water. The silence stretched long enough to become its own answer. Elena felt disappointment settle heavily in her chest, not because she expected perfection, because she was beginning to realize how many secrets surrounded this man. "Long enough," Sebastian finally said. The honesty surprised her more than any denial would have. Elena stared at him. "How long is long enough?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His movements remained calm, controlled, almost deliberate. Around them, conversations continued. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. People checked phones and hurried through late afternoon meetings. The ordinary world felt strangely disconnected from the conversation unfolding at their table. "Months," Sebastian said. Elena looked away. The answer hit harder than she expected. Months. While she had been building a future with Ryan, someone else had already seen warning signs she never noticed. "And you never thought to tell me?" she asked quietly. Sebastian's gaze remained steady. "At first I did not know who you were, and after you learned," he exhaled slowly. By then the situation was more complicated. Elena almost laughed, not because anything felt funny, because complicated seemed like the smallest possible word for what had happened. Federal investigations, secret phones, anonymous threats, missing persons reports. She folded her arms and stared through the cafe window. Sailboats moved slowly across the harbor under bright autumn skies. For the first time in days, there was no rain, yet the sunlight brought little comfort. "Ryan lied to me for 2 years," she said. "Apparently everyone knew except me." Sebastian shook his head. "Not everyone. You knew pieces of it." Elena turned back toward him. "What pieces?" For several moments he studied her carefully. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a thin folder. Nothing dramatic, just a simple paper file secured with a clip. He placed it on the table between them. Elena looked at it without touching it. "What is that?" "Information that federal investigators will eventually make public." Her pulse quickened. "Why show it to me?" "Because you deserve to understand what happened." Slowly, Elena opened the folder. Several pages rested inside. Financial summaries, distribution records, internal company communications. Most of the terminology looked technical, but one pattern immediately stood out. Medication shipments repeatedly failed quality verification standards. Inventory numbers changed between facilities. Documentation disappeared. Replacement products appeared without proper records. Elena frowned as she read. "These are prescription drugs." Yes, the shipments were altered. That is what investigators believe. Elena felt a chill despite the warm afternoon sunlight. As someone who worked inside healthcare, she understood the implications immediately. Patients trusted medications, families trusted prescriptions. Entire systems depended on that trust. The idea that someone might manipulate those products felt deeply disturbing. She continued reading. Ryan's name appeared repeatedly throughout transaction records, not as a victim, not as a bystander, as a participant. The realization hurt more than she wanted to admit. Sebastian remained silent while she absorbed the information. He did not defend Ryan, he did not criticize him, he simply allowed her to see the truth herself. After several minutes, Elena closed the folder. "The person I thought I knew never existed." Her voice sounded smaller than she intended. Sebastian's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes people hide parts of themselves because they are afraid." Elena shook her head. This was more than fear. Neither spoke for a while. Outside, the harbor reflected golden afternoon light across the water. The television coverage shifted to interviews with federal officials discussing ongoing investigations. More names appeared, more companies, more evidence. The story was growing larger by the hour. Unfortunately for Elena, another piece of the puzzle was about to surface. Sebastian's phone vibrated on the table. He glanced at the screen. For the first time since she met him, Elena watched genuine concern cross his face. It lasted less than a second, but she noticed it. "Understood what happened?" she asked. Sebastian slipped the phone back into his pocket. A search warrant was executed this morning at another distribution facility, and his eyes met hers. "Investigators found records connected to the anonymous messages you received." Elena's breath caught. "They know who sent them?" Sebastian hesitated. The pause alone told her the answer mattered. Then he spoke quietly. "No. But they know who the messages were intended to protect." Elena stared at him. "Protect?" Sebastian nodded. "Those warnings were never meant to threaten you." The realization hit her instantly. Every message, every warning, every attempt to keep her away from Warehouse 17, she had assumed someone wanted to silence her. Suddenly, another possibility emerged. Someone had been trying to keep her from walking directly into danger she did not understand. And for the first time, Elena began to wonder whether the anonymous sender might actually be on her side. The possibility followed Elena for the rest of the afternoon. Someone had sent warnings. Someone had tried repeatedly to keep her away from the investigation. And according to everything Sebastian had just revealed, those messages were not intended to frighten her. They were intended to protect her. The realization changed the shape of every assumption she had made over the past week. By early evening, the harbor was glowing beneath streaks of orange and gold as the sun began slipping toward the horizon. Elena and Sebastian left the cafe together, neither speaking much during the walk along the waterfront. The air carried the scent of salt water and distant rain. Boats rocked gently against their moorings while office workers drifted home through the fading light. For the first time since Ryan disappeared, Elena felt less afraid of the mystery itself and more afraid of how completely it had altered her understanding of reality. "You knew the warnings were not threats," she finally said. Sebastian kept his gaze on the harbor. "I suspected. Why did you not tell me?" A faint smile appeared and vanished almost immediately. "Would you have believed me?" Elena opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. The truth was uncomfortable. A week ago, she probably would not have believed him. She would have assumed he was manipulating her, hiding information, controlling the situation. The silence became answer enough. They continued walking beneath rows of glowing streetlights. The city around them felt strangely peaceful compared to the chaos that had dominated the previous days. Eventually, they reached a quiet section of the harbor where fewer people passed. Water reflected the evening sky like liquid glass. Elena stopped near the railing. "There is still something you are not telling me." Sebastian's expression remained unreadable. "There are many things I have not told you." "Why?" The question came out softer than she intended. He looked toward the water before answering. "Because some truths are easier to understand once you know the rest of the story." Elena folded her arms against the cool breeze. "That sounds like another way of avoiding the question." For the first time, Sebastian laughed quietly. The sound surprised her. It made him seem less distant, less untouchable. Then the moment faded. "Perhaps," he admitted. The honesty caught her off guard again. Everything about him seemed built around careful control. Yet whenever she expected deception, he responded with uncomfortable truth instead. They stood in silence for several seconds. Then Elena asked the question she had been carrying since the beginning. "How did you know about the bruises?" Sebastian's eyes shifted toward her immediately. The harbor sounds seemed to disappear. Even the wind felt quieter. Elena looked away first. She had not intended to ask. Not tonight, yet the words had escaped before she could stop them. Sebastian rested his hands on the railing. "Because I noticed them. Most people did not. Most people were not paying attention." The answer landed harder than she expected. Elena stared at the darkening water below. She remembered long sleeves in warm weather, excuses, careful makeup, years of minimizing things she should not have minimized. She remembered how easily people accepted the explanations, how desperately she wanted them to. "You did not even know me," she said. "No, then why care?" Sebastian was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its usual distance. "Because nobody should become invisible while standing right in front of everyone." Elena felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. The words contained no grand declaration, no dramatic promise. yet they felt more genuine than anything she had heard in a very long time. Unfortunately for her, the conversation was about to become far more complicated. Sebastian's phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. He listened without speaking. His expression grew increasingly serious with each passing second. When the call ended, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the city skyline. "What happened?" Elena asked. Sebastian hesitated, not because he wanted to hide the answer, because he appeared to be deciding how much she was ready to hear. Finally he spoke. "Federal investigators completed another round of interviews today, and Ryan gave them additional information." Elena felt her pulse quicken. "About the warehouses?" Sebastian nodded. "Among other things." "What other things?" The fading sunlight reflected across the harbor between them. Sebastian met her gaze. This time there was no hesitation at all. "Ryan told them who first provided evidence that started the entire investigation." Elena stared at him. A cold realization began forming before he even spoke the next sentence. And when he finally did, every piece of the puzzle shifted into place. "My name was in his statement." The harbor seemed unusually quiet after Sebastian spoke those words. "My name was in his statement." Elena stared at him while the last traces of sunlight faded beyond the water. For several seconds, she could not find a response. Every theory she had built over the past week shifted again. Ryan had not disappeared because Sebastian removed him from the picture. Ryan had not been hunted by a mysterious enemy. The investigation that unraveled everything had started long before Elena ever noticed the cracks in her own relationship. And somehow Sebastian had been standing near the center of it from the beginning. "You gave them the evidence?" she finally asked. Sebastian was no pride in the gesture, no attempt to make himself look heroic. "Some of it." Elena looked toward the harbor. The water reflected scattered city lights beneath the deepening blue sky. "Why?" The answer came immediately. "Because people were getting hurt." "You are not a federal investigator." A faint smile touched his face. "No, then why involve yourself at all?" Sebastian rested his hands against the railing. The cool evening wind moved through the harbor, carrying distant sounds from restaurants and passing boats. "Several years ago, one of my companies supplied equipment to hospitals across New England," he said. "During an internal review, irregularities appeared inside the distribution network. Missing inventory, altered records, shipments that did not match documentation." Elena listened quietly. At first it looked like accounting errors. Then it became something larger. "The warehouses." Sebastian nodded. Elena lowered her gaze. Everything connected now, the shipments, the financial records, the secret phone, Ryan's involvement. The investigation had not begun because of personal revenge. It had begun because someone noticed a problem and refused to ignore it. "So you reported it?" "Not immediately." His honesty surprised her again. "I spent months confirming what we were seeing. Once I was certain, information was provided to the appropriate people." There was something strangely heavy behind his calm demeanor. Not guilt, not fear, responsibility. The kind that came from carrying knowledge for a long time. "Ryan knew it was you." Sebastian nodded again. "Eventually." The realization explained so much. Ryan's silence, his nervousness during the phone call, his warnings. He had known exactly who stood behind the investigation closing around him. "And the messages?" Elena asked. "The anonymous warnings?" Sebastian looked toward the city skyline. "Federal investigators believe they came from someone inside the network who wanted you away from the situation. Someone protecting me." "Yes." For the first time in days, Elena felt a small measure of relief. The unknown sender had not been threatening her. Someone had seen her standing too close to a dangerous situation and tried to push her away before she became part of it. The thought felt unexpectedly comforting. Darkness settled gradually across the harbor. Streetlights flickered on one by one along the waterfront promenade. People passed nearby laughing, talking, living ordinary lives untouched by investigations and secrets. Elena envied them for a moment. Then she felt something else. Freedom. Ryan's lies no longer controlled the narrative. The mystery was finally becoming truth. "There is one thing I still do not understand," she said quietly. Sebastian waited. "Why did you keep helping me?" He looked at her for several seconds before answering. The pause felt more meaningful than any speech, because every time you learned something new, you kept moving forward instead of pretending it was not there. Elena felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. No grand declaration followed, no dramatic confession. Just simple truth, somehow that made it more powerful. At that exact moment, several miles away, federal investigators completed another round of interviews. Additional records were verified, more statements were signed. The case that had hidden in shadows for years was finally reaching its conclusion. Back at the harbor, Elena leaned lightly against the railing beside Sebastian. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt different now, easier, warmer. The city lights shimmered across the water beneath the night sky. Then Sebastian's phone vibrated once more. He glanced at the screen. This time, instead of concern, something resembling relief appeared in his eyes. Elena noticed immediately. "Good news?" she asked. Sebastian slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward her. "Ryan just agreed to testify publicly." Elena blinked. "What does that mean?" Sebastian's expression softened. "It means the truth is finally about to become impossible for anyone to hide." The morning of the hearing arrived beneath clear autumn skies. Sunlight reflected from the glass towers of downtown Boston, casting bright patterns across streets that had felt permanently gray only a few days earlier. Elena stood outside the federal courthouse with her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. A cool breeze moved through the plaza, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and conversation. People entered and exited the building without realizing that for her, this day represented the end of a chapter she never wanted to live through. Reporters gathered near the entrance behind temporary barriers. Cameras waited. Microphones waited. The story that had once existed only inside hidden messages and confidential files had become public. Elena watched from a distance. She had no desire to stand in front of cameras. She wanted something much simpler. She wanted closure. Inside the courthouse, hearings continued throughout the morning. Investigators presented records, attorneys reviewed statements, witnesses answered questions. The process felt slow compared to the chaos that had brought everyone here, but Elena understood why it mattered. Truth required patience, facts required evidence. For too long, too many people had relied on secrets. Around noon, she stepped into a small cafe across the street. The windows overlooked the courthouse entrance. Warm light filled the room. The smell of coffee and fresh bread replaced the cold air outside. Elena sat near the window with a cup of tea she barely touched. Her phone remained silent, no anonymous warnings, no unexpected calls, no mystery messages. The quiet felt unfamiliar, peaceful, but unfamiliar. A few minutes later, the chair across from her moved. Elena looked up. Sebastian had arrived. He wore a dark coat and carried the same calm presence that seemed untouched by the noise surrounding the case. He sat down without speaking immediately. Neither of them felt the need to fill every silence anymore. That realization surprised Elena. Not long ago, she had questioned every word he said. Now the quiet itself felt comfortable. "How did it go?" she asked. Sebastian glanced toward the courthouse outside. "The hearing is progressing exactly as investigators expected," Elena nodded slowly. "So this is really over." Sebastian considered the question. "The investigation will continue for a while, but the uncertainty is over." The distinction mattered. For the first time since Ryan disappeared, Elena no longer felt trapped inside unanswered questions. She knew what happened. She knew why it happened. Most importantly, she knew none of it had been her fault. The realization settled gently instead of arriving all at once, like sunlight slowly filling a room. "I used to think if I worked harder, understood more, or stayed patient long enough, I could fix everything," she said quietly. Sebastian listened without interrupting. "I kept explaining away things that should have worried me." She looked toward the courthouse entrance. "I convinced myself that seeing the truth would somehow make life harder." A faint smile touched Sebastian's face. "And now?" Elena thought about the question. She thought about the pharmacy, the bruises she used to hide, the excuses she used to make, the fear she carried everywhere without realizing how heavy it had become. Then she looked back at him. "Now I think pretending not to see the truth is what made life harder." Sebastian nodded once. The answer seemed to satisfy him. Outside, courthouse doors opened and several people emerged surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed. Questions filled the sidewalk. Yet none of it felt personal anymore. The story belonged to public records now. Investigators. Courts, evidence. Elena no longer carried responsibility for any of it. Unfortunately for her emotions, one final conversation still remained. Later that afternoon, Detective Harris contacted her with an update. Ryan's cooperation agreement had been formally accepted. Additional charges connected to the distribution network were moving forward against several individuals and companies. The detective spoke professionally, but one sentence stayed with Elena after the call ended. Ryan admitted his choices hurt people who trusted him. The words brought no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only acceptance. Some endings did not require revenge. They required accountability. As evening approached, Elena found herself standing once again near Boston Harbor. The water reflected golden light from the setting sun. Boats drifted quietly across the calm surface. Sebastian stood beside her near the railing. Neither spoke for a while. The city behind them seemed softer now, less threatening, less uncertain. Finally, Elena exhaled slowly and looked toward the horizon. For the first time in years, the future felt like something she could choose rather than something she had to survive. And standing beside her, Sebastian seemed to recognize that change without needing her to explain it. Because sometimes the most important victories are not the ones announced in courtrooms. Sometimes they happen silently, in the moment a person realizes they are no longer afraid of tomorrow. 3 weeks later, Boston looked different. Or perhaps Elena Bennett was the one who had changed. Morning sunlight poured through the front windows of Harbor Point Pharmacy, replacing the cold fluorescent glow that had once defined her days. Customers moved through the aisles carrying prescriptions, greeting cards and bottles of vitamins. Phones rang, registers beeped, life continued exactly as it always had, yet nothing felt the same anymore. Elena stood behind register 3 organizing inventory reports when she caught her reflection in the glass of a nearby display case. For a moment she barely recognized the woman looking back at her, not because her appearance had changed dramatically, because the constant tension she once carried was gone. The habit of scanning every room, the instinct to apologize before speaking, the invisible weight she had dragged through every day for years, it had slowly disappeared. One choice at a time, one truth at a time, one morning at a time. Outside, autumn sunlight illuminated the streets of downtown Boston. The investigation had continued exactly as federal officials promised. Court proceedings moved forward. Public records became available. Companies faced consequences. Ryan Keller honored his cooperation agreement and testified regarding the distribution network. His decisions remained his responsibility. Elena no longer felt connected to them. That chapter belonged to the past. Surprisingly, closure did not arrive through dramatic confrontation. It arrived quietly, through acceptance, through understanding, through realizing that not every ending required anger. Some endings simply required walking away. Around noon, Elena finished her shift and stepped outside October air. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt water through the city. Her phone vibrated gently. A message appeared. Lunch? Elena smiled before replying. 20 minutes later, she arrived at a waterfront cafe overlooking Boston Harbor. The same harbor that had witnessed questions, secrets, revelations, and uncertainty now shimmered peacefully beneath a cloudless sky. Sebastian Romano sat at a table near the windows. He looked up as she approached. The familiar calm in his eyes remained unchanged, yet something else had changed between them. There were no mysteries left standing between them now, no hidden investigations, no unanswered questions, only honesty. Elena took the seat across to speak. The silence felt comfortable, natural, like something earned rather than created. Lunch stretched into the afternoon. Conversations moved effortlessly from serious topics to ordinary ones. Books, travel, work, family stories, future plans, simple things. The kinds of conversations people have when they are no longer surviving a crisis. At one point, Elena found herself laughing, truly laughing. The sound surprised her enough that she stopped for a moment. Sebastian noticed immediately. "What?" Helena shook her head. Nothing, but it was not nothing. She had spent so much time living inside fear that happiness sometimes felt unfamiliar. Sebastian seemed to understand without explanation. He always seemed to notice the things she never said aloud. As afternoon turned toward evening, they walked along the harbor together. Boats drifted across calm water. Children chased seagulls near the boardwalk. Street musicians played soft melodies beneath strings of decorative lights. The city felt warm, alive, hopeful. Eventually they reached a quiet section of the waterfront where fewer people passed. The sun hung low above the horizon, painting the water gold. Elena rested her arms against the railing and looked out toward the harbor. For several moments neither spoke. Then Sebastian turned toward her. There was no dramatic speech, no grand declaration, only sincerity. "You know," he said quietly, "for a long time I thought protecting people meant solving every problem for them. Elena looked at him, and now a faint smile appeared. Now I think real strength is trusting someone to stand beside you instead. The words settled gently between them. Elena understood exactly what he meant. He had never tried to control her future. He had simply remained there when she needed the truth, when she needed support, when she needed someone to see what others ignored. Slowly, Elena reached for his hand, not because she needed rescuing, because she wanted to. Their fingers intertwined naturally beneath the fading sunlight. No fear, no hesitation, no hiding. The following morning dawned bright and clear over Boston Harbor. Elena arrived at work wearing a short-sleeved blouse for the first time in years. The decision felt almost insignificant, yet it meant everything. No long sleeves, no careful concealment, no attempt to hide pieces of herself from the world. As she unlocked the pharmacy doors, sunlight streamed through the glass entrance. Customers would arrive soon. Another ordinary day would begin. Elena paused briefly and looked outside. Across the street, Sebastian stood beside his vehicle, preparing to leave for a meeting. Their eyes met through the morning light. He smiled. She smiled back. Then he drove away. The bruises were gone. The fear was gone. And for the first time in a very long time, Elena Bennett was not hiding anything at all.